Hi, everyone. This is J.R. Foresteros, and I'm back with take two because apparently take one had zero audio. So I apologize for that. We are hoping that the audio is up and going now. I think I fixed everything on my end. Anyway, we're back. So, welcome to our final week of introduction for the book of Revelation. And I know you're thinking like 6 weeks is a pretty intense amount of introduction. And you're right, but this is how John wrote it. So that's how we're doing it. If you recall, we have been working our way through the first three chapters of the book of Revelation, which is 7 letters to these 7 churches here in what we call the Roman province of Asia, and or what the Romans called the province of Asia. We today call it Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. And so we've been going through these 7 cities and the letters that John dictated to them from the cosmic Jesus in his vision. And we did not go through them in the same order because we think that John did them as a sort of mail route, Ephesus, then Smyrna, then Pergamum, and Thyatira. We grouped them into themes. And so we'll come back to that at the end today. But today we're at the last church, the Church of Laodicea. So some things about the city of Laodicea that are, I think, really fascinating and, more importantly, germane to our conversation today. First of all, the city of Laodicea was built not for convenience, but for strategic purposes. It was built in the spot that made it helped to defend the whole region, and because of that, it was not close to a natural water supply, which is one of the major things you need for a city of any size. So they actually had to build aqueducts that brought water from both the uh, the 2 cities that were near-ish. There was a hot spring in the city of Hierapolis, and then there was a cold spring in the city of Colossae, and they had to pipe water in from both of those cities. Of course, they were far enough away that by the time the water got to Laodicea, it was neither hot water from Hierapolis nor cold water from Colossae. It was just kind of lukewarm water that then had to be boiled or whatever before they used it again. But that's what they had to do. And of course, if you read the letter already for today, you can see where that shows up. Laodicea was also an incredibly wealthy city. Their wealth derived from 3 different things. One, they had a thriving gold trade. 2, they had this purple dye that they were able to produce in Laodicea that was very valuable for textile manufacturing, particularly for garments for the wealthy and the powerful. And then they also were known for this eye salve that you can put on your eye, and allegedly it would help you to see better. And so this wealth actually made them an incredibly self-sufficient city. In fact, they were struck by earthquakes, just like many of the other cities in this region. But when Rome came in to try to help them rebuild and restore, which was, as if you recall from previous weeks, that was one of the ways that Rome sort of imperially dominated cities in this region, the Laodiceans were able to refuse them and say, no, thanks, we'll rebuild on our own. So they were an incredibly self-sufficient city, and as a result, they were much less connected to the sort of Roman propaganda, right? They didn't have to build a temple to Roma or any of that kind of stuff. You'll see all of that reflected in the letter. So let's get in. In the letter to the Laodiceans, Jesus identifies himself as the Amen, which is the way of saying the truth, right? The faithful and true witness, the beginning or the source of God's creation. Unlike the other cities, Laodicea does not get any kind of a shout out. They're not doing well at anything, which is, like a big yikes, especially because that's like the last one. So we're kind of used to this pattern by now. Ugh. Their problem is that they're neither hot nor cold. Now, you've probably heard sermons about this before, and people will make the strange connection to say, like, well, Jesus would rather you be on fire for him or a total atheist. A total atheist is better than being like a lukewarm believer. I don't know that that's a good interpretation of this passage, because in the Laodicean context, either either hot water or cold water was great. The issue was not the temperature of the water unless it was lukewarm. Now, you will see later that there is something about taking sides. So, I mean, that could be in there, but I just think that would have been an overreach. I also think it's weird that someone would think that God would rather you be an atheist than someone who's like on the fence or whatever. Again, what God wants is for us to be faithful. That's the end, period. No or, right? That's it. So also, the Laodiceans walk around saying, I am rich, but God says you are actually poor, blind, and naked. Again, digs at the things that they put stock in, right? Their gold, their purple garments, and their eye salve. So what Jesus tells them they need to do is buy gold from him And then he will give them white garments to wear, which remember symbolize victory, not purity, and then also ointment. So again, he's basically saying, right, these things that you put stock in, you need to get them from me. You need to not trust in yourselves. He's really coming for their self-sufficiency. Then the promise that Jesus makes is, look, I'm outside your door. I'm standing and knocking. Let me in so we can feast. Everyone who is victorious, which again is a reference to his white robes, will sit on my throne. Okay, now this is another passage from this that gets misinterpreted a lot. You see it as an evangelism passage, right? Like you even have that famous white Jesus painting where he's standing outside the door and knocking, and we say, Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart. Open up and let him in. The problem is here, Jesus is not writing to a bunch of non-believers, right? He's writing to a church. So this is not an evangelism passage. This is what we might call a discipleship passage. Okay. So what is going on here? Well, remember in the ancient world, they didn't have hotel rooms, right? They didn't have Airbnbs. They didn't have hotels.com, any of that kind of stuff. If you were traveling, hopefully you were traveling to a place where you knew someone, and you'd go to the city square and they'd come and look for you on the day or around the days you said you'd be hopefully arriving, because again, travel is kind of unpredictable, right? They'd see you and they'd bring you to their home. It was also entirely possible that you might go to a city where you don't know anyone. And then there was this complicated dance that they did that was almost intuitive for them, where someone would arrive and then someone who was of a similar class or caste to you would see you and invite you to their home as an act of hospitality, but also as a way of preserving sort of the collective honor of your class. And if that sounds weird, I know it sounds weird. It's very far from our experience today. But if you have any friends who are Korean, or maybe you're Korean or Korean American, you might know that for Koreans, age is really important. So when you walk into a room, it's very important that you know who you're older than and who you're younger than, because there are even the way you address someone in Korean changes on whether they're older or younger than you. And so Koreans develop this very complicated process that they internalized at a very young age of figuring out who's older than you and who's younger than you. And it's something that's very important for Koreans when they first meet each other. In fact, I have some Korean and Korean American friends who talk about Squid Games and how what we lose in the subtitle translations are how they're all addressing each other in these, formal addresses that indicate who's older and who's younger, and how that changes how you interact with people and the social expectations. That's a similar thing to what happened in the ancient world. They had to figure out where they were on the social hierarchy pretty quickly and pretty subtly. And so they had ways of doing this. So that one of the fruits of that system was that when a stranger came to town, they weren't left standing outside unless they really, deserved it, which would be a shameful thing. So the implication here, what the ancient Laodiceans would have heard, is that Jesus shows up in town and none of his people came and got him, right? Which would have shamed him in front of all of the city of Laodicea. And regardless of that, Jesus ignores that shame and comes to their house and knocks on their door so that he can be let in. This is an incredibly audacious move for Jesus. And it's one that's actually full of grace, because again, they left him standing outside. They left him in the cold. They left him in the dark. And yet still Jesus is coming to them and saying, hey, it's not too late to let me in and feast with me so that you can join me, so that you can be victorious, so you can sit on your throne. So what's going on out of this letter of the city of Laodicea? Well, what I'm provoked by is the amount of privilege that they have. Because they're wealthy, because they're self-sufficient, they don't have to align themselves with Rome. Unfortunately, it means they also don't have to align themselves with Jesus either, right? They are self-sufficient, and that means that they've become, in a way, disconnected both from the Roman imperial, so what we would call the nationalism, right? But also they've become disconnected from Jesus himself, that they don't need him or Rome. And Jesus says, oh, that's actually really bad, because ultimately everything you have comes from me. Even your wealth comes from me. These things that you build your self-sufficiency on ultimately are from me. And so if you truly want to be victorious, if you truly want to be on the right side of things, you need to align yourselves with me. You need to reject that self-sufficiency and come with me. I think this is why, for me at least, the church in Laodicea really resonates with me quite a lot. I wouldn't say it's for the American church, but I'd say it's probably for the white church, unless unless you're steeped in nationalism. But for so many of us, when we see these political debates going on right now, when we see these struggles over like immigration or the big beautiful bill or a lot of race things, we just say, you know what, that doesn't affect me, so I'm just going to focus on Jesus, right? And what activists will say, silence is compliance, right? If we're not speaking up, we're actually supporting the architects of oppression because uh, we're doing that out of a sense of privilege, right? That we don't have to pay attention to those things. Even though we know they're affecting people, they're not affecting me or mine, they're not affecting us. And so we can choose to ignore them because it's too difficult, right? It's a complex issue, or I don't have the education, or I don't have a personal stake in it, or whatever the reasonings that we give, we can sit back and say, we're just going to focus on Jesus. The problem is, though, if we take Jesus seriously in Matthew 25, he shows up for us in the most vulnerable, in the least of these, right? This is where he says, for whatever you've done to the least of these among you, you've done to me. And whatever you haven't done, you have not done for me. And I think we need to take that very seriously because we have so many vulnerable populations in our country right now getting exploited and getting taken advantage of, often in the name of nationalism, in the name of the US and the idea of this like nation and this particular picture of the nation that people have created. And so when we choose to opt out of that conversation, all we're doing is supporting the nationalist agenda. Ultimately, this lukewarmness is not serving anybody except the oppressor. And so, as difficult as it might be, we need to account for our privilege. We need to look at the things that we are gaining our sense of self-sufficiency from. For the Laodiceans, it was their wealth, it was their work, right? It was their things that they were known for, is the things that propped them up and gave them the ability not to be affected by natural disasters or imperial policy or nationalistic agendas, right? The things that gave them distance from that. And Jesus said, if you were able to realize that all of these things ultimately come from me, that would hopefully change your attitude towards how you're meant to use those or wield those for the cause of justice. So we need to distinguish between the US and this particular idea of nationhood that we've maybe inherited or been taught or whatever, and then the true us, which of course does not know nation or border or ethnicity or any of these things. And we're going to be talking about that so much more through the rest of the series. But for now, I want to review kind of the intro to this book, right? We've seen that there are these 7 churches which have 7 different kinds of reactions to this encroaching authoritarian nationalism. Some of them, like Thyatira and Sardis, are embracing it wholeheartedly. Some of them are rejecting it, like Smyrna and Philadelphia, and they're suffering for it. They're facing real consequences for it. And Jesus says, it's going to get worse before it gets better, so you need to be prepared to hang in there. Some of them have a divided response, like the church in Pergamum is kind of giving into it more than not, and embracing some of these false teachers. The church in Ephesus is really doing a good job of resisting those teachers, but they're doing it in a way that has become cold and legalistic, and they've lost that love that animated them at first. And then, of course, we saw the Laodiceans today, who are ignoring the problem altogether because they have the privilege of being able to. None of these responses is good according to Jesus. Except for the rejecting it, right? Jesus wants us to remain faithful. And to do that, we need to see what's really going on. So if you think back to our Wizard of Oz analogy that we started with, what we've done so far is kind of looked at the state of affairs in Oz. And now starting next week, we're going to go behind the curtain. John's going to take us with him as he gets zooted up into heaven. And we're going to see sort of what's really going on behind the scenes. Really excited to go there with you, but I hope you've enjoyed this introduction so far. I would love to hear what has resonated with you from these 7 churches, where you maybe see yourself among the 7 churches, and what you're most excited for as we move forward. Let me know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching these videos with me. They're always free for everybody. If you would like to support, you can obviously subscribe to this newsletter and get some of my other great content that is for subscribers only. But again, this is always going to be free, and I'm just really excited to be on this journey with you. So until next week, take care of yourselves. Grace and peace be with you, and I'll talk to you soon.